In today's world, people feel lost in a sea of ideas. Which ones should we accept? Stay tuned because you're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. Here is your host, Kurt Jarris.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here on another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. It's a great joy to be here talking to you this afternoon about we're going to be talking about the U.S. elections, the presidential elections, well, and also other elections occurred on this past Tuesday. So I've seen a lot of people. A lot of people have been angry. There have been protests in certain cities throughout the country. There's been certain claims of racism and hatred of sorts. And so it's really been a divisive campaign, a divisive election. And so some people are even blaming the Electoral College for what has transpired because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the Electoral College. And so I want to briefly talk about that, and then after that we'll be bringing on Dr. Os Guinness to speak with us about his thoughts, and also we're going to be talking about his new book called Impossible People. So I'm very much looking forward to talking to him about that. And so so for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Electoral College, basically the way it works is this. The Electoral College is comprised of 538 people, actual people, that in December, I forget which date it is, it might be the 12th or the 14th, they actually come together in their respective states and they submit their votes for who should be president. And those are the people that elect the president, not you. Your vote is for who should be those electors. So if your state votes for the Republican nominee, then you are essentially voting for the Republican electors. And if your state votes for the Democratic nominee, then your vote goes toward electing those electors that will vote for the Democrat. Now, what's really fun is sometimes in history we have what's called a faithless elector. That's an elector who says they're going to vote for the Republican nominee or the Democratic nominee, but who does not. And this actually happens rarely, but it does. And so it's quite interesting. One proposal out there, in fact, I think it's on change.org. I think it's got over 500,000 signatures, is for these electors to be faithless. Now, it's rare when just one person is faithless. For 30 plus people, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But we'll see. I mean, next month it happens officially. But so that's essentially the way it works. And now a lot of people, I know I was talking to people online, some people are just unhappy with the Electoral College because of the fact that it doesn't represent America, right? I mean, it should be the majority. It should be the majority winner that becomes president. Well, there are a few problems with that. So the first problem to start with is that despite gaining a plurality of the votes, Mrs. Clinton did not get a majority of the votes. So none of the candidates received 50%, which means if we're going with majority rules, then no one wins. So you've got to come up with a backup system for how that works. Maybe you've got a weighted voting system or something like that. But I love the Electoral College. It is like a puzzle with colored pieces that are constantly changing, and their values change as well. The worth of the puzzle pieces changes every 10 years. That's a lot of fun trying to play the game. And so there are rules to this game, and it's really great because I think it does give an accurate representation of America. Because if you just go with the popular vote winner, then what you're going to find are candidates just spending their time in highly populated areas. And so whether that be cities or even large suburban areas where they might corral the voters. And the next thing you know, it's the cities and those suburban areas that are determining who should be the leader of our nation. So really the Electoral College helps support the small man, the minority groups. And our system is built upon supporting minority groups. And I think it's a beautiful thing. It creates a hybrid-like system so that it's not just a mob rule, essentially. It's not just 50.1% decides. Those are built in throughout and across our system in different ways. There are some benefits to the Electoral College. One of them, for instance, is voter fraud. If voter fraud were to occur, then it's going to directly affect the totals of the popular vote. But if voter fraud occurs, it's only restricted to that state in which it occurs. So if there is voter fraud, and say 30,000 votes are fake votes, and that's the difference, or makes up more than the difference in an outcome, then that means it's only in that state that's been affected. While, yes, those are so many electoral points, electoral votes, it may not affect the whole outcome. So it's a sort of preventative measure against cheating, gaming the system. And of course, the two nominees agree to the terms here about the Electoral College. They know that's the way it's played. And so they base their candidacies, they base their campaign strategies on that. And voters also base their voting habits upon that as well. So you might suppose hypothetically you're a Democrat, but you know that your state is not going to elect the Democratic nominee. Well, you might want to, if it's an open primary, vote for the Republican primary ticket so you can try and wiggle in someone that's more closely aligned with your views. So voters have the strategy as well. And so at least for the general election here, a number of voters in mountain states voted for the Libertarian nominee because they knew that their vote wouldn't affect the outcome. But if it's a popular vote, you can kiss third parties goodbye. I mean, entirely, just no chance whatsoever, because it will just further degrade into the two-party system. So there's a beautiful thing to the Electoral College. Perhaps some of you disagree with me. If you do, I'd love to get your thoughts on the matter. You can give us a call. The number is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. So later on, towards the end of the show, we're going to be talking with the panel about the Electoral College. I'd love to get their thoughts. In studio today, we've got Kevin, Joel, and John. So thanks for joining me here, guys, gents. And those watching on Facebook Live, you can see all of our beautiful faces that are made for radio, right? So, so give us a call. We'd love to get your thoughts if you've got comments or questions on that. So those are my brief thoughts on the Electoral College. And so it's just really been fascinating to see how the outrage at the system has all of a sudden turned on the Electoral College. This has happened before a few times in American history where the popular vote loses out to the electoral vote. And I like it. It's a preventative measure. It prevents mob rule. And now maybe if you're unsatisfied, there are two states, Maine and Nebraska, that have hybrid systems. So the popular vote winner gets 2 of the electoral votes, and then it's based on congressional district. Now, maybe there's a nice advantage there. So say like the state of California did that. Well, then all of a sudden some Republicans would be represented in the general election because they would have congressional votes. And vice versa. I mean, even in Texas, you'd get the same thing. So maybe there are pros and cons to that. Kevin was shaking his head, but we'll ask him why later. So, but without further ado, I wanted to bring on a very special guest, someone who I've looked up to myself, who I highly respect, and who I believe is a prophet to this nation. He is our modern-day Alexis de Tocqueville, who is correctly recognizing American society for what it is, and providing not just good advice, but in a sense holy advice. He is looking to Scripture and noting that it is only the gospel that will save society. And so, without further ado, I wanted to welcome Os Guinness onto the show. Os, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Cut, it's a tremendous pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. So, maybe just generally here, since we're still in the relevancy of talking about the election, this has been an untraditional campaign season for both parties, it seems, for the whole country. What are your thoughts on the campaign season and then also on the outcome?
My word, you want me to be alive at the end of this? No, I mean, often historians say that however bad things get, there was always the election of 1800, which was simply awful. And that's taken as the gold standard of bad elections. But the election of 2016 and the race for the bottom has joined 1800 as maybe the most negative, the most rancorous, the most bitter election in American history. So I think it's been an appalling way of doing things. And sadly, even the responses to the election by the protests and the violence we've seen, you can see that the country is divided as at any time until just before the Civil War. And there needs to be a profound healing. But is there a Lincoln-like leader in the country? That's what's needed now. Someone who knows the American experiment and knows how to pull things together.
There is the concern there that we've lost our way, isn't there? The society has changed, and I don't like using the term values, but our values, the things that we do value, the morals that we have, our religious beliefs, have changed. So it seems that we're fighting a new battle in a sense. Maybe it has a different face, but it seems to be the same battle. Would you say that's right?
Well, I agree with you. At an extraordinary moment. If you look wider, Kurt, we're seeing the decline of the West. We're seeing a faltering search for a new world order. We're seeing a whole crunch of global problems that need to be handled. And at the same time, you've got this very profound crisis in the American Republic. And I would argue that what we're seeing is an attempted takeover by progressive secularists from the Jewish and Christian faiths as being the working or defining faith of the West. And that's the struggle for our time. And you have two very different views of freedom, for example. And whichever comes out, it will profoundly affect the future of America. Now, the trouble is, in debating these things, we don't have a debate. We have a culture war that grows more bitter all the time, so trust has completely broken down. And that's the saddest thing to me after the election.
Yeah, I've told people that we can't just be culture warring for the sake of culture warring. That doesn't win over souls in any way. We need to be, if we are going to be culture warring, it should be done on the basis that we're trying to make disciples of Jesus. We're trying to win people over to the faith. That should be our first priority. Because interestingly enough, I think there was an ESPN NBA analyst who said that it was just funny that you get guys in sports world commenting on politics and religion, but he said at the end of the day, he knows who's on the throne. So he said this on cable TV, which was quite surprising, and I think that was very true.
Really?
Yeah, it was just a beautiful thing because it's true. At the end of the day, Jesus is on the throne, and that's how we need to be working with that mindset. And we can't just be culture warring, and that seems to be what we're witnessing here. There are people in the streets protesting what seems to be a free election. That's not like rights have been infringed upon. What would you say to those that are currently protesting? What's a way we can reach out and say, hey, we need to work and heal and reconcile on this, move forward?
Well, those who win, in this case the Republicans, have to reach out and say, we are all Americans, and we are the interests of all Americans, and genuinely, in Lincoln's terms, bind up the wounds. Mm-hmm. But I think that means for those of us who are Christians and supporters of the religious right, you cannot turn, as you said, you cannot turn the country around by culture warring or by winning election campaigns. Do it at a much deeper level. Now, I have no hesitation to say that in the present state of things, we, followers of Jesus, we are the great defenders of human dignity, of a genuine grounded view of freedom and equality and things like this. So it's an extraordinary moment for Christians with an unshakable confidence in the gospel to move out and to really heal the wounds, but to point towards a better way.
Now, you've said that two of the largest threats to American democracy are secularism and radical Islam. And so my observation here, at least in this nation, is that secularism is having the larger influence, although radical Islam is a global issue. And though we're becoming more secular, it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but secularism has trouble making sense of even human rights. I don't think it can accurately present a case for why we should have these rights. Would you agree, or what are your thoughts?
No, well, that's true. But, Kurt, I would argue you've got three S words that all overlap, and they have the same sort of effect, but they are different, and we need to understand the differences. So secularism, ending in ISM, is a philosophy, and you can believe it or not believe it and argue against it and so on. And then you've got separationism, which is a policy. In other words, those who would like to drive all religion out of the public square. And that's very different, although it overlaps. And then you've got what's called secularization, which is not a philosophy, it's a process. The way the modern world tends to shift us from a supernatural reality to a basically secular, this world reality. And that is happening willy-nilly. Now, those three forces overlap, and together, when they converge, they're extremely dangerous to Christian faith. In fact, they undermine us. But we've got to separate them. So we are openly arguing against secularism, and we disagree, and I think all true liberals should disagree with separationism, but we've got to be really aware of how secularization is affecting even Christians. Many Western Christians, unlike our sisters and brothers in Africa or, say, Asia, they're actually almost operationally atheists. And their worldview is almost as secular as their secular neighbors next door. And that's something we've got to really face. And part of the reason, well, put another way, the scandal of the American church is that in this country, uniquely in the Western world, the church is numerically a majority, but culturally very weak. And you have tiny minorities, like, say, wonderful groups like the Jews, or people we would disagree with, like, say, gays and lesbians, but they are less than 2% of America. So those groups have far more cultural influence than Christians, who are far more than 50, 60, maybe even 70% of America. And that's the scandal of the church. The Christian church is not salty. It's not light-bearing, as our Lord called us to be.
Wow, that's a provocative thought, that for all the Christians in our society today, that we are failing at our duty.
Well, I think, Kurt, we have to begin there, because if you look, globally speaking, the Christian faith is the world's first truly global religion. We're the most numerous faith on the earth, but we're exploding in growth in the global south. Sub-Saharan Africa, China, Asia, and so on, and not doing well anywhere in the West. In other words, we've capitulated, caved in to the seductions and the distortions of our advanced modern world. And as I said, if you look at Europe or Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and so on, in most countries, Christians are a minority. But the scandal here is we're a majority and still incredibly weak.
Yeah, we're functioning like a weak minority.
That's right. In other words, the challenge is us. We're the problem.
Yeah.
The pogo. I've seen the enemy, it's us.
Yes, yeah. So speaking of seeing the enemy, I want to get into your background a little bit. So for our listeners that are first time hearing you speak, they'll say, "Hey, he's got an accent. Where's he from?" Now, you're not from the United Kingdom, are you?
Well, I was born in China, where my parents were medical missionaries. My family is actually Irish in background, from Dublin. But I did, after my first 10 years, go to school and then college in England. So I am basically English. Lived in Switzerland and then more recently lived over here.
Right. Yes. Of course, you've got the Irish heritage because your name attests to the wonderful beverage That happens to be my favorite alcoholic drink.
Oh, splendid. Also tied in with the Guinness Book of Records.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right. Right. So, okay, so you spent time in China, and you were a schoolboy when Mao Zedong took over. Is that right?
Yes, I well remember the day in January 1949. I was 7, and my dad said to me, "Son, we're in trouble. Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist leader, has just flown to Taiwan." And sure enough, 3 months later, in came the hundreds of thousands of troops of Lin Biao and the communist regime. And the reign of terror began, including the terrible persecution of the Chinese church.
So you have witnessed it firsthand. For a lot of us Christians today, we talk about, hey, yes, we're a majority, but we're not doing much. It seems like we're just complacent. We're comfortable here in our 21st century America. Of course, our comfortability is being threatened, but there seems to be greater issues at stake here. And as someone like yourself who has seen so much in your lifetime, it's amazing to learn, to read your books, to learn from you, to listen to you. And so I thank you for all of your labors for the kingdom. So I wanted to move into your new book here. I mean, you're the sort of fellow that publishes about a book a year. I don't know how you do it, but but it's a blessing to God's people that you do. So Impossible People, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the name comes from Peter Damien's background in history. Is that right?
That's right. He was not very well known, but he was an 11th century reformer at a time the church was incredibly corrupt, theologically, economically, financially, sexually. And he was so sold out to Jesus. He was described as unmanipulable, unbribable, incorruptible, and I love George Orwell's later term, unclubbable. And so people called him the impossible man. In other words, he simply couldn't be manipulated. And some people undoubtedly said it with enormous admiration of him, and others with extreme exasperation because they wanted to manipulate him, but they couldn't. And that's what we need followers of Jesus to be today. There's a soft accommodationism in much of the evangelical movement, a kind of openness to syncretism in that soft way. And we need to be people of real backbone, strong convictions, of course, with all the grace, the mercy, the love of our Lord, but at the same time, unbribable and unmanipulable.
And so you also talk in the book about how we need to be speaking to an audience of one, the voice of God. So if we are to be impossible people, we should be unclubbable. We need to keep in mind that there's only one voice to whom we are obligated to follow. And that, of course, is the voice of God. And so that's really a challenge that you present to us, that we shouldn't care about what people, to a certain extent, we shouldn't care about what people think about us, because we can't be accommodationist. As you said, we can't hold to this soft syncretism. I mean, as we read the Old Testament, we learn about how the Israelites became syncretists. They incorporated other religious beliefs into their own theocracy, their own society, their own religions, and they worshipped other gods, and that was a problem. Now, speaking of the Old Testament, tell us a little bit about how you think that the Old Testament covenant is sort of an analogy or reflective, maybe I'm not finding the right word there, of the American Constitution. It seems that the founding fathers were deists after all, right? They weren't exclusively Christian, some people might suggest.
Well, no, Kurt, I put it slightly differently. If you look at the founders, you move at one extreme from, say, Patrick Henry, who was an evangelical, to really solid believers like George Mason, who was 100% Orthodox, to believers who were somewhat vague, and like George Washington, right out to deists like Thomas Jefferson, and almost free thinkers like Thomas Paine. In other words, you had a tremendous variety.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no question that most Americans were Christians, and the overwhelming majority of the ideas that shaped this republic were Christian. But here's the point. Talking of covenant, if you ask Americans today what's behind the founding, they would say, well, of course, was it democratic Athens? And the answer is absolutely not. The framers were extremely wary of the direct democracy of Athens, and they tried to build something quite different. But actually, the thing that shaped the republic more than any other single thing was the covenant at Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus. Now, if you put it like this, from the 4th century, when the church won, right down to the Reformation, the church was hierarchical in its structure. Mm-hmm. And as historians say, it borrowed too much of Roman institutions, so the papacy was a reflection of the Caesars. But the genius of the Reformation, it recovered covenant. And you can see covenant jumped from Sinai to Calvin, Zwingli, Knox, Cromwell. And England, it was the lost cause. It failed. The king came back in 1660. But what was the lost cause in England became the winning cause in New England. And you can look at the Mayflower or the Arbella, the model of Christian charity with John Winthrop. It was all covenant. They borrowed directly. And you can see covenant shapes what later became, in a more secularized, somewhat nationalized form, Constitution. And that there are a number of incredible implications, the most important being covenantalism, or what became constitutionalism, reunited faith and freedom. You can see this in Tocqueville. The trouble is Americans take faith and freedom for granted. The two words roll off each other. But if you read Tocqueville, his introduction, he says, in most of history, people who loved religion attacked liberty, and people who loved liberty attacked religion. And of course, he's referring to France, where church and state were hierarchical and oppressive, and the revolution threw off both of them. And so there's the genius of this country, the spirit of religion and the spirit of liberty went hand in hand. And you know, Edmund Burke, the great Irish orator, when he was defending the American colonies in the House of Commons, he said to the English House of Commons, you shouldn't have been surprised, because these are the Protestants of Protestantism. They're the dissenters of dissent. Why? Because they took the Reformation seriously, and they went back to covenant. So we need to recover that. It's an incredibly important idea, and it's the secret of the American past, and it will be the remedy for the American future.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating that covenant is the thing here, and though it seems that in our society today, not a lot of people want to hold to their word. They're willing to change their word, or they don't want to be bound by these rules. And so we've got to take a short break here. But after the break, Oz, I want to pick your brain about where you see these trends are going, and maybe some advice for Christians as to how we can respond to the trends these days and to win people over back to a covenantal mindset. So let's continue after a short break from our sponsors.
You're listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
Evangelical Christians are talking about hell. What if we believe what we believe because we've always believed it? What if the gospel is really a matter of life and death? We want you to open your mind, open your Bible, and rethink hell. At rethinkinghell.com, evangelicals look at what the Bible says about hell, putting conventional and controversial views to the test.
Americans have been traveling down the health insurance highway for decades. But lately, it's been taking us to places we don't want to go. For Christians, it's hard to know which road to take. Or is it? Samaritan Ministries provides a different direction, a biblical path for their members to pray for each other and share financially in each other's medical needs.
This idea that Samaritan has adopted from the book of Acts should permeate all parts of our lives, not just health sharing. We, as a body of believers, are living out New Testament Christianity. This is what God intended for the church.
Do you believe that you need an insurance company, or do you believe that God will provide your needs? And there are people that you've never met before who are going to pray for you and meet your needs. There's another way.
Looking for a new direction for your health care? Visit us online at SamaritanMinistries.org.
Well, thanks for sticking with us through that short break. I've got the great honor this afternoon to be joined by Os Guinness, just a prolific author, an esteemed social critic, and that's a great pleasure to have him on the show today. But Os, I'm wondering, before we get back to discussing your book, Impossible People, which was kindly provided for me by University Press here, I am wondering if you are open to playing a round of rapid questions.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
All right. So, for those of you who are first-time listeners to our show,
You got to remember, I'm not American, so some of your questions are often things I haven't a clue about.
well, hey, I think that's why this will be a great round, a great opportunity, so we can get your answers to some of these questions. So for those that are first-time listeners to the show, Rapid Questions is just a segment that we have where we ask short, lighthearted questions, and we're looking for fast responses. So, Oz, you've got 60 seconds. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What is your clothing store of choice?
Oh, gosh. Ralph Lauren.
Okay. What song is playing on your radio these days?
My favorite composer is Bach and Mozart.
All right. Favorite sport? What's your favorite sport?
Soccer.
Are you left-handed? Are you left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed.
Do you drink Dr. Pepper?
Very, very occasionally.
Have you ever driven on the other side of the road?
Absolutely.
What is your inner milkshake flavor?
Oh, gosh. Caramel?
And if you were a cricket pitch, which one would you be? A cricket.
The oval.
Oh, say that again?
The oval.
Okay.
It's the greatest cricket ground in my world. I used to be a member there.
That's awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for playing Rapid Questions. Okay, so before the break, in case you're just joining us now, I briefly talked a bit about the Electoral College. I explained the system and how it functions and why I like it. And, if you've got your comments or questions on that issue, we're going to be talking about that with the panel at the end of the show. But please give us a call if you want to join our discussion. The number is 505-2STRIVE. That's 505-278-7483. So, Oz, Impossible People here really presents a challenge to Christians to hold fast, but also we must be winsome as well in the way we engage our culture and our society, and we can't just, as we've talked about and we agree, we can't just be culture warring for the sake of culture warring. It's not about that at all, and it won't solve anything, right? It doesn't solve the root of the problem. So what do you think are some of these trends that you are seeing in our society today?
Well, Kurt, let me get back to what you were saying about the Electoral College.
Sure.
Because the Electoral College was one part of a very ingenious system of checks and balances, all of which was put forward because of the danger of the abuse of power, because people were sinners. And that's what's missing today. If you read things like, anyone who understands the sexual revolution, which comes from the Marquis de Sade and André Breton and Wilhelm Reich. If you read Wilhelm Reich's Sexual Revolution, the book, he coined the term. What's amazing about it is his incredible utopian naivety about human beings. There's no problem. The only problem is repression. If you can remove repression, and he thinks sexual repression is the worst of all the repressions, then you've got total freedom for human beings. And his naivety is absolutely incredible. Whereas the framers, they had an amazing radical realism because they did believe in sin and the danger of the abuse of power.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to ask ourselves as Americans in America today, do we really believe there's a problem in human nature or not? And that's one of the big divides.
Right, yeah. Just even human nature, how does it function? It will be...
You mentioned before the break, people don't keep promises.
Mm-hmm.
Nietzsche says being a human being is being an animal entitled to keep promises. But that's actually rather biblical. Whereas Machiavelli and David Hume and most of the people in the Enlightenment believed that humans could never keep promises. And certainly we see with covenants, the Lord keeps his word, but we don't. And that's the weak link in covenantalism and in constitutionalism. And you're putting your finger on something incredibly important. Now, when it comes to you actually asked about the religious right. I would say the two greatest dangers of the religious right since 1975 and the birth of moral majority are, one, what's called politicization. They trusted that politics could do more than politics can ever do.
Right. Yeah.
And that was a fatal mistake. We will never change the world through politics alone, very important though it is.
Mm-hmm.
But secondly, they made another very bad mistake. They tried to do the Lord's work, say fighting abortion and so on. They tried to do the Lord's work, but in the world's way. And as soon as our means don't serve our ends, they undermine the ends. So whatever we do in public life, and we've all got to be involved politically, no question, but we've got to do it in a Christ-like way if we're really going to honor him and be effective. So someone like Wilberforce is a far, far better leader and model than the leaders we've had more recently.
Yeah, that's a good word, that we can't do it the world's way. And it's so true that, if we were, say, on the pro-life issue, if we were to pass a constitutional amendment, as some politicians are suggesting, I'm not convinced here that's the right strategy to go about it. But if that were to happen, abortions may go on the decline, but it's not going to stop the root of the problem. And abortions will still happen. The point is, we need to go about loving people in our everyday lives. We need to love our neighbor as ourselves. And instead of living comfortable lives here in America, we need to go out and start being uncomfortable. We need to be reaching out to people that we might, some people might think poorly of us, right? I mean, Jesus went and ate with sinners, right? The scripture says. And we need to go and do that because those are the people that Jesus wanted to reach, and we should have those same desires if we're going to be Christ's followers. I do think we should change hearts and minds over abortion through persuasion. Right.
I think late-term abortions are an absolute crime and a scandal. And the way Hillary supported those in the campaign was appalling. Mm-hmm. But even, say, early-term abortions, which are a matter of convenience in our culture, we should be people who are arguing for life and responsibility and persuading hearts and minds that that's wrong.
Yeah, and we've got to do it in a winsome and loving way, for sure. And it seems that
absolutely
over the past few decades, we've failed on that front. So hopefully we're getting better at it, of course. So some of the argument has been helped, I think, even by technology, for instance. But we've got to be persuasive in a great way. Which also reminds me, Oz, I know we've just got a few more moments here with you, but we'll have to bring you on again to talk about Fool's Talk, because I want to have an episode just on that. What a great book. Okay, so
thank you.
Getting back here to Impossible People, I had a question about the fourth chapter. So the fourth chapter is called Exploring the Heart of Darkness. And in Exploring the Heart of Darkness, you first start off with an anecdote about a time that you spent in U.S. Congress. Was there any intention there between using that anecdote and talking about the heart of darkness?
Well, I was trying to... No, not in terms of the place. But the congressman actually put his finger on something. You know, he said to me, if you have a flood, a small boy can put a finger on the dike and be a hero, obviously thinking of the story from the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, I'm looking out in America, and what I see is a mudslide. Who can stop that?
Mm.
And there's a lot of people who talk about the fraying, the unraveling, the eroding. Now, what on earth is behind that? That's what I was interested in that chapter. And one of my heroes in the social sciences, Zygmunt Bauman, he calls the fact we're living in the modern world in a liquid society. Things that were solid, like the family or like faith, are just melting down and evaporating and just disappearing between our fingers, as it were. And we got to explore that, because Nietzsche once said, when God dies in a culture, in other words, when the reality of God is no longer there, the culture becomes weightless, light as air. And you can see in the scriptures the glory of God is weightiness. But the opposite of that is what the Hebrew calls Ichabod. The glory is gone, the weight has gone. And that's the idea of gone with the wind. Gone with the wind, just blows away in the air. And there are a lot of American convictions and institutions like the family, which have simply become insubstantial and almost unreal today. And we need to explore why that's happening and how we can stand against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm active on social media, and on Facebook I get into some debates from time to time, and I am strongly sympathetic to the view that the family is the fundamental building block of a society. And so it is really the structure, the social structure, that provides great opportunity for not just social success, but religious success, if you will, for great advancement and for stability even in our society. And without it, we're raising generations of people that are lost and confused about even what their purpose in life is, and how we should make our laws then, of course. I mean, if you don't know what your purpose is, how do you know what the country's purpose is? No,
that's right. If you go back, the family for most of our Western history it served two obvious purposes: generation, upwards creation of new human beings, and transmission. In other words, the heritage of the past was handed on to the present, above all through the family, through things like the family dining table. Now, I mentioned Wilhelm Reich earlier in his book, The Sexual Revolution. His open attack, he attacks two things above all: the family, number one, and the church, number two. And he says quite openly, the decisive battle against the Christian faith will be the sexual revolution. And so you want to undermine the family and the Christian faith, and then you'll win. And you can see both of them under extreme assault today.
Yeah. So, with these things being under assault, what is your advice to us for how we can, in a sense, fight the battle, right? Because it's being on. How do we defend those things, but engage our culture, engage our society? What would you say is our way forward?
Well, Kurt, I would begin by saying, it may sound too basic, we've got to take heart in God. Now, as we need followers of Jesus who have an unshakable conviction. The problem is not that we're not up to date, or not that we're not relevant enough. The problem is we haven't got an unshakable confidence in God and the good news of Jesus. So we've got to start there. And then I think really living out our faith in all our callings wherever they take us. High school teaching, law, medicine, computers, whatever it is, every sphere our life takes us, we should be living out our calling as followers of Jesus with salt and light. And then thirdly, we need a great recovery of persuasion. The Christian consensus has gone for good. And now with 1,000 languages spoken around us, we need to be advocates and witnesses for our Lord with skills. So, for example, we need to abandon all the formulae and recipes, all the little 1, 2, 3, 4s that we trot out for everyone. They're absolutely useless. Jesus never spoke to two people the same way, and nor should we. But we need to have the skill in knowing how, whoever we meet, an atheist, a Buddhist, whatever, we know how to talk to them and persuade them about the good news of Jesus. and so on and so on. In other words, it's actually basically very simple foundational things that we need to recover today and just move out with confidence. God is greater than all. He can be trusted in all situations. Have no fear. Have faith in God.
Oz, well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and coming on the show and allowing me to pick your brain about where our country's going, correctly diagnosing what some of the problems are so that way we can have a good prescription forward. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really appreciate you and the work you're doing. I think you are a prophet in our society today. You are our modern-day Alexis de Tocqueville, who, as a foreigner, has come to our land and correctly viewed our society for what it is and what the proper strategy forward is. So thank you, and God bless you for everything that you do, Oz.
Well, very kind of you to have me. Thanks so much. Your kind words. God bless you, too.
Thanks, Oz. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so that is just a great opportunity that we have to hear from Oz. And so he just has a way about him of speaking about things in such succinct terms, but in a way of elaborating upon ideas. I mean, he has words for concepts I haven't even imagined. Maybe you've felt the same way as you were listening in. And so it was just a great opportunity. I feel quite blessed to have him on the show. So now I want to spend the time talking about I want to talk about the Electoral College, but I'm game to open it up to the panel here to also talk about some of the things that Oz had mentioned before, because I feel like the discussion on the Electoral College could go for a while. Why don't we talk a little bit about the family? So that seems to be something that is debated in our society today, that what is the role of the family and how important that is to the social structure. Kevin, let me throw this at you, the first question, because I know where you stand a little bit, and maybe you don't agree with them, but by and large, libertarians tend to think that the individual is the building block of a society, right?
Right, yeah.
So, but where would that then cause a breakdown, say, of the family, which seems to be important?
Right. Well, I think the breakdown would come if the federal government started, or any government, started interfering with, A, the contract between the man and the wife, and B, the responsibility that they distinctly have for their children. And because children need to be forced more than adults, people who are into, and most libertarians accept that. It's like an exception to the non-aggression principle that you need to instill a sense of morality in children. And the best people to do that are the parents. So at the very least, we should give them some deference when you have these borderline cases.
Interesting. So for these cases of children, where then becomes the line when all of a sudden they are adults? And who gets to decide where that line is?
That's a very difficult question. Yeah, and that's a problem for libertarian philosophy. I mean, some people go to extremes and say that the parents don't have an obligation to the children, which I think is a terrible thing, and it's contrary to pretty much all of society. But knowing where that line is, that's debatable. Yeah.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. What are your guys' thoughts in general from the discussion with Oz about his book, which for those watching here on Facebook, I will hold it up for you. Impossible People, Christian Courage and the Struggle for the Soul of Civilization by University Press. So good opportunity for you to check that out. And if you haven't, Oz has a number of wonderful books as well. And he's just a great guy to learn from. So I recommend checking out his books if you haven't already. So any thoughts on Oz and what he had to say?
I mean, I'm just excited. I kind of want to check that book out. I mean, I haven't read it yet. And it looks like it's going to contain a lot of, just things to start a thought process, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, like I mentioned, one of the first issues is that we need to correctly diagnose the problem in our society. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short. Because if you can't correctly diagnose what the problem is, you're going to give the wrong prescription, right? The wrong course of action. Yeah. And so, as he had noted for secularists, right, I mean, they think some problems aren't problems at all. So, for example, religion, right? That's the problem. So here you get, what were the three things he said? He said separationism.
Right.
Separationism being sort of, hey, you keep your religion private, right, but don't bring it into public life. And he even noted how liberals should be against separationism.
Right.
True
liberals.
Yeah, true liberals. Yeah, if we're talking about a free society, people should be actively involved in all, not just privately, but publicly as well. So it's so important for us to correctly diagnose the problem, and I think Oz does that. I think he just has a brilliant way. We can listen to how, our Christian nation was founded upon Judeo-Christian values, right? I don't know how many times I've heard that or heard politicians talk about it. But to listen to Oz speak about it that way, it's not just his accent, guys. That's what you're thinking.
That doesn't hurt. Yeah.
But the way he talks about it, the covenant, the Jewish covenant, and it's just amazing. It's like hearing it again for the first time. And it's so inspiring to me. And so, like I said, I think he gets the problem right. And so maybe then there's a difference on, I don't know, right course of action. I mean, I think he gets it right there too. I just don't have any disputes with him.
I agree. Yeah. And especially how he unified, he pointed out how it unified religion and freedom in that. And that's the thing. Once you have a religion that esteems freedom of religion, that's no longer just a secular value. You're not, we aren't a secular, government. We are actually, in a sense, a theocratic because we're following the rule
to a degree.
Yeah,
right.
to in the sense that if God wants us to be free to pick our religion and stuff like that, well, then we're establishing that.
Yeah.
And so that's like a confluence of secularism and religion as opposed to a conflict.
Right. It's the foundation for where we come from. It doesn't mean that the government forces everyone to believe in God.
Exactly.
So it's not a theocracy in that sense. But it certainly is a foundational part of where we come from. I mean, it comes back to the issue of rights, of our rights.
Right, yeah. So to a certain degree, there is a sense in which we are making theological claims. But now to the person, to the secularist that might say, well, you can't do that. Okay, why not? Because, we're trying to come up with a structure of society here. We're trying to recognize where do rights come from. So for the person that says, no, you can't, so then that from A follows B, okay, where do the rights come from secularism? Do they just come from the government?
Right.
I mean, that's typically what they think.
Right.
Okay, that could change whichever way the wind blows.
Right.
So good luck in creating the society that you want. And so I think that's a very dangerous thing.
And how do you distinctly define religion such that, the
Good.
Orthodox ones are obviously religions, but then you have a lot of these personal religions, you have a lot of personal beliefs that act like religions, and
right.
why do we exclude only certain religions is
Right.
essentially what it
if
comes
we do
to.
any more.
Right. Yeah.
You got the religion of the flying spaghetti monster. You've got Star Wars fans that are creating the Jedi Church or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think you can go back to the founding days and see some of our founding fathers who weren't explicitly, let's say, a Christian as we would consider them today, and they didn't object broadly to the foundation of God, of the Christian worldview forming our country. Because you can go back and say, are these good ideas or not?
Yeah, right. And there is a line, right, between an overarching,
right,
even religion interfering with a free society. And Oz made that point too. It's kind of like a fine dance,
right,
that you have to have, because if you have religious views that are too invasive in society, in a public setting, I should say, right? I want Christianity to be invasive in every part of society. But if it's from the top down,
right,
as opposed to grassroots, if it's from the top down, that can be problematic because you're hindering a certain degree of freedom, which is
Absolutely.
good for a flourishing society.
Right. I think at the end of the day, it's the compatibility with liberty that makes it a solid worldview to base government off of.
Yeah, so that's what Oz said, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to infringe or ever infringe on people's individual rights. It actually ensures them.
Right.
And so when you have a limited government, I mean, I think that Christianity is actually super compatible with a limited government, the ability to give people their own choice, and it doesn't have to force a belief system on anyone.
Right.
John, I wanted to pick your brain on the concept of secularization and what Oz called syncretism, where you get other worldviews entering into Christian worldviews. As someone like yourself, you work in the city, so you see a diversity of people. What's been your experience in people that may call themselves Christians, but you see, hey, they're really, they've got these other influences?
Right. I think what I hear a lot of the times is, well, as long as you're a good person, you'll be okay. I don't agree with certain things in the Bible. And as a Christian, they think that if they do love everyone. I mean, I'm not saying that their intentions aren't good, but sometimes if you follow maybe what the media says or what the masses want, it kind of starts to distort your own view and what Christianity really is about. People are afraid to disagree with things, especially in the city downtown. If I say something that a lot might not agree with, they say,
Sure.
And I say, well, we're both Christian, right? Shouldn't you kind of discuss these things? But a lot of minds nowadays, especially in modern society, are set. And you really have to show people love to start the discussion and opening up about it. And I think that's really important, too, from our standpoint, to try to start a dialogue about those types of things.
Yeah, and
going to the Electoral College, the cities, I mean, that's another reason why you can't have them dictate the masses.
Yeah. Funny segue there.
Right.
No, but let me say, just to close on that point, we really need to be persuasive in reaching people, especially when the syncretism, or what Oz called the secularization, has infiltrated their minds. I mean, if they're going to call themselves Christians, okay, there are certain beliefs that follow from that.
Right.
And so we need to then do our best to engage with even the nominal Christians, because culturally speaking, these nominal Christians are joining the nuns group. They're joining the secular group here. And so it's really important that if we're not reaching out to the nuns, we need to be reaching to those nominal Christians and saying, hey, stay home, and responding to those ideas. And it's funny because I saw there was a study done, I don't know if it was by Lifeway. I saw the article on Christianity Today about heresies in the evangelical church and how it surveyed evangelical Christians, and pretty much like over 60 to 70% of evangelicals were heretics because they didn't know their Orthodox Christianity. So hopefully we'll devote an episode to discussing that, though I did give that one talk at the conference on Christian Orthodoxy, so that'll be fun to get to that. But yeah, there's work to be done here on persuading people and talking to them about their beliefs. We shouldn't be scared of talking about religion and politics. John, you're a childhood friend. I've said this to you time and time again. Those are the two most important things in life. Right. Why aren't we supposed to talk about them?
They don't talk about it at, the dinner table?
At the dinner table, yeah, right. Okay, let's move along to the Electoral College, because I'm sure you guys have some thoughts on this. And so, Kevin, let me start with you again, because you were shaking your head earlier on in the episode when I had talked about Maine and Nebraska and their hybrid system. You don't like the hybrid system, huh?
Right, not as much. I think it contradicts your point that it would force the candidates to go to each state, because the candidates would just go to certain districts. You would segment that, and it destroys the solidarity within the state. The state itself, no longer has as much power, and I'm for states' rights.
Well, so it doesn't have much power in the Electoral College. Is that right? So you would still get the 2 votes for the popular vote. So there is still some importance.
Right, yeah, you'd still get those 2.
But yeah, in a state like California, all of a sudden that becomes...
Right, and California might split, north and south. You can...
Well, and east and west, too.
Right, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Because you've got the farmland in central and eastern California.
Yeah.
So you're not a fan because you feel like it would still...
Well, the second reason is that, and I wrote this op-ed that I shared with you, that people who lose in these states, whose vote would be more counted, I guess, your way, in my way, where it's winner take all in a state, the people who know they're going to lose, the people in New York, in California, in Illinois, they can use their vote to expand the field. And if they switch to your way, then they would be more forced to only pick between the two, And I think that's like a latent power that people have not accepted that they have and have not embraced it. Because really, unless you're an ardent Trump fan, no Republicans in those 3 states should have voted for Trump because their vote didn't matter in that respect. But it would have mattered a lot if they would have voted Libertarian or even if they like Greens or anything like that.
Sure.
Would have made a big difference in the system as a whole. So their vote is more systemic the way it's currently structured. You divide it into districts, and you become stuck with 2 candidates again.
Interesting, Joe. What are your thoughts? I mean, I've got a buddy on Facebook. He lives in California, and he feels like his vote just does not count.
Sure.
And so even though that was part of the reason why I think he's supporting the popular vote winner, because his vote doesn't matter in California.
Right. I mean, I think. Well, one, Republican, I think, last solidly. I mean, California went solidly Republican, 1988?
Up until 1988.
Yeah, so, I mean, clearly it shifts around. I mean, that feels like forever ago right now, but it's not. And so changes happen. Yeah. And the Electoral College actually helps that. Just as we saw this election with Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan. Yeah, I mean, so.
Well, yeah, when you say the Electoral College helps that, I couldn't help but think, I mean, in a sense, it's true. Every 10 years, the census occurs, and the numbers on the states change.
Right.
So a lot of them stay the same, but many of them, there are changes, a few points here and there. So Florida has become more valuable just because of the shifting population trends, either because people move out of states into new states or just natural growth, generation occurs.
And you saw that with Virginia. That used to be a red state until after George Bush, you had a lot of people from the East Coast moving to Virginia.
Right.
And now they're primarily,
it
seems like
some of those might be government workers, too. I read something about how there are more government workers than manufacturing jobs in the country today. So that's just fascinating to see that. But you're right. Yeah, Virginia used to be a red even it used to be swing. Now I don't even know if it's swing anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So that's just fascinating. Then again, the Rust Belt, was, some people thought, kind of swing, maybe not. Well, Ohio for sure.
Right.
Pennsylvania, Michigan.
Yeah. Michigan was thought to be solid Democratic.
Well, in Wisconsin, Hillary Clinton didn't step foot in Wisconsin during the campaign season because she thought she had it in the bag.
Yeah.
So the map does change. And that's part of the reason why I have fun with it. It's like a puzzle.
Right.
With the pieces ever changing.
And I think the game is fair because the rules have been the same.
Right.
I mean, the whole time they've been the same. And that's the important part, I think. I mean, even if it feels distasteful if you're a Clinton supporter this election cycle.
Yeah.
I think it's just a reminder to the other side to be open to the result because the rules are the same. So if it happens the other way, the opposite side needs to accept the results.
Alan here on Facebook writes that we should outsource government jobs to China.
Probably be cheaper.
Yes, a nice humorous comment there by Alan. Thank you for listening in. It is fascinating. I mean, no, DC did see a lot of growth, so it's very interesting. We will see what happens. I am, shall we say, open but cautious to see what happens. I'm not guaranteed that a number of the policy things that I like will be advocated for. Some of the things spoken of what would be advocated for wouldn't go with my views, but we'll see. I don't know if a President Trump will do the things he said on the campaign trail. That's the way it goes. I mean, even Barack Obama on the campaign trail talked about a lot of things and things didn't happen. Right. Even when I was in 6th grade, I think I said, "Hey, I'll bring an arcade room," and of course I won people's votes over. So that sort of thing happens. So we'll see. We'll see what a President Trump will bring in the next few years. It'll be fascinating because speaking of divisions of power, Congress is in favor of the GOP in both houses right now,
right.
The House of Representatives and the Senate. So that will make it easier for a President Trump to get done what he wanted to get done.
And in 2 years, there's a lot more Democratic seats up.
So, so we'll see.
The majority could grow.
It could, yeah. And so the outlook I have for that is that, it may not just be 2 years. It may be 4 years of him getting what he wants. So, for example, President Obama had those 2 years between, in 2009, 2010, where they had a supermajority even for a short time, and that's when he passed a lot of this stuff. Some of the financial reform, the Affordable Care Act, the supposed Affordable Care Act, I should say, and other things. So we'll see if President Trump gets 4 years of policy, and I don't know what he'll bring. Maybe it'll be the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz. Trump is the face, Pence is the man behind the curtain. I don't know. So it'll be interesting. Of course, I think some people are going overboard on this in their reactions, and so I'm a bit disheartened at that. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we just need to have an open mind here to see what happens. We need to wait until policy is implemented.
Right.
And people are already on Twitter, people are calling for his assassination.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I don't know if you. Oh,
No, I haven't
tons of
seen
people.
that.
Yeah, no, loads. And so.
Well, it doesn't look good on their side too. If they said Trump ran such a divisive, hateful campaign, they're doing worse beyond leagues. I was watching the news the other day, and they're writing "capitalism kills." I mean, that even has nothing to do with what just happened.
Right.
They're just want whatever they want. But
yeah. So my piece of advice would be. Wait and see what policies come. It's not going to be as drastic as people are making it out to be. And even still, on the reverse side, politics has a funny way of bringing that out in people. During the general election, during the campaign season, people were saying, "Oh, well, we can't elect this person because it'll be the end of America." Insert this person with whichever candidate you dislike.
Right, yeah.
You get that rhetoric on both sides. And so I was talking to someone, and I said, "Hey. Okay, what would that look like? Do you think that will really happen?" I mean, the answer is no. So politics has a way of bringing out the worst in people sometimes. So perhaps it's our duty to stay true to Oz's advice here, that we need to be grounded, we need to be unclubbable people, and we need to have our priorities straight true, that we are called to be Christ followers first, and we then need to go from there. So, and I think if we do that, if we're unclubbable, if we're impossible people, if we are the Peter Damians, right, we are going to be strong in what we believe, and we will know how to be wise as serpents in engaging with people and being winsome. So we ourselves won't be making those bombastic predictions, because that doesn't convince anybody.
Right.
It doesn't win people over to your cause. It just plays on people's fears about the unknown, and I don't think that's a very good path forward. So it's good advice by Oz. He is a shaman, to use a non-biblical term. So I don't know. You guys have any other closing thoughts on the Electoral College on that?
I think it's a great system. I think there's a reason why, and that's why the country is so incredible. Is because. We're genius enough to know that you need to split up power.
Yeah,
and
right. Divide the power.
Everyone needs a voice, and states need a voice. Everyone says Hillary might have won the popular vote. Well, in the states where she needed it, she didn't. And that's why Trump won the electoral. No matter who you voted for, it would be the same if Hillary won.
Yeah, it's the rules of the game. Yeah.
And I think it's also important not to label voters whether you voted for Hillary or Trump. Everyone might have had a different reason. And when you see these things on TV calling Hillary supporters names and Trump supporters racists, I mean, it's absurd. And that's not going to help people's voices.
Right.
It's going to turn people off.
Yeah.
So you got to start a debate based on fact and not crazy emotion.
I think that's what actually led to Trump's firm hold on things, is that when you call somebody a racist for saying, build a wall or make America great again, I mean, these things, like kids chanting, build a wall, is in the category of hate crime that is being promulgated right now.
And all the people who talked about that, why don't they leave their doors unlocked and open at night? Don't you want security? And that's not being racist.
Right.
You just want
I think that's
the
key, that we can't be making these leaps from a certain policy point to being a racist.
Correct.
And when Trump confronts that, and he doesn't care what people call him a racist, they glommed onto him and wouldn't let go. I mean, he's honest, even if he's totally confused about a lot of things.
Yeah.
He comes across as being honest and speaking for them, and I think basically that's what led to his victory.
And all of that doesn't mean that there aren't racists,
Right.
who supported Trump, and there may be racists who supported Clinton
Absolutely.
too. I mean, I know some liberals who I would consider to be more racist than any Republican I know.
Yeah.
And it's just I think that can it can be a factor, but it's not the thing necessarily.
Yep. Yeah. So I like the Electoral College. We live in a democratic republic, and that finds itself in many areas of politics, even just at the state level. Right. Your state is likely a democratic republic where you elect a politician to go and represent you. So if you really have beef with the Electoral College, you should also have beef with the way that other areas of American politics functions. And then I would expect that you would also then just hold to the majority rules. But I would warn against it. I mean, mob rule, I think, is a very bad thing. It leads to a lot of change very quickly, and it leads to a lot of minorities having their rights infringed upon.
And one thing I mentioned earlier is the irony of you have somebody like California, who's been very liberal and advocating for a strong central government. And now that it's switched, there's a movement to secede, and that's popular in the news now.
Right.
And the whole reason for a limited federal government is so that the states have more power. And so the people who are advocating for secession and don't want to be part of this anymore, well, you shouldn't have made government so powerful in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's get together and advocate for the reduction of power of the federal government, and then we can each live how we more closer to how we want.
Laboratories of democracy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hey, well, that does it for our show today. Thanks, guys, for those thoughts on the Electoral College and for the discussion with Oz. I'm grateful for the continued support of our sponsors. Those are folks that just chip in a few bucks every month to support what we're doing here. If you're interested, you can go to the website, veracityhill.com, to learn more about that. I'm also thankful for the partnerships that I have with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Consult Kevin, The Sky Floor, Rethinking Hell, the Illinois Family Institute, and Evolution 2.0. And thank you to the tech team today here, John, Joel, and Kevin. And to our guests, thank you, Dr. Os Guinness, for your wonderful thoughts and your great ministry work. Although it's not formally a ministry, it is that. And I want to thank you for listening in and for striving for truth on faith, politics, and society.
You've been listening to Veracity Hill, striving for truth on faith, politics, and society. This is a listener-supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.